Yes! That music can mean only one of two things. Either you're listening to the soundtrack to the god-awful American adaptation of Godzilla, or it's time for the first ever episode of Rickon Wrestling, the online wrestling show for the thinking man. Steve Austin likes to dedicate his podcast to the working man, or this one's for you, the thinking man, the thinking fan. And that's exactly why I decided to start this podcast, because wrestling gives you a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. You know, it can be frustrating being a fan sometimes, and sometimes you just gotta get it off your chest, and God knows, the world needs podcasts. Known in some circles as Violent Rick, I am Rick David, and now will be your Huckleberry for the next
41 minutes and 8 seconds.
Now this is a brand new show on a brand new channel, so I'm really looking for your feedback on this. If you like it, let me know that you like it. Give it a thumbs up, maybe leave a comment. Hey, if you really like it, then you can always share it or tell a friend. Now, here on Rickon Wrestling, we're not going to be going through everything that happened on every show, because there are plenty of good podcasts that can give you just that if that's what you're looking for. So instead, we're going to be going in depth on issues that are pertinent to what's going on right now in the WWE. And just the WWE, because honestly, I've been an on-off TNA fan over the years, and right now I just don't have the heart to get back into it. So, we're going to take it topic by topic, and I'm going to break these videos up. But if you do want to listen to it all in one go, I'm also going to upload the whole show. The whole effing show, if you will. So let's jump right into it. The first topic I want to talk about is shades of grey in wrestling. That is ambiguous faces and heels. Now, professional wrestling, also known as sports entertainment, which is exactly the same thing, by the way, despite the common distinction, is a completely unique art form, unique drama and storytelling device. And because of this, some things work in wrestling that don't work elsewhere, in literature and film. And likewise, some things work in literature and film, but they just don't work in wrestling. And Shades of Grey is one of those. So what exactly do I mean by Shades of Grey? Well, I'm sure you all know faces and heels, good guys, bad guys, heroes and villains. It's a dichotomy as old as mankind itself. And there's a simple reason why wrestling has always used this balance between good and evil. Because wrestling, unlike literature, unlike film, is all about two sides clashing, two sides fighting, and about the audience being invested in that fight. About them being vocal, whether they're supporting one guy, booing the other guy. That is an essential ingredient in wrestling. You know, in film, in books, it's about telling a compelling story with compelling characters. But it's not just that simple, one guy versus the other guy, or one team of guys versus another team of guys or girls. But in wrestling, that is what it all comes down to. You can have these complex stories going on to build up to the matches, but it's all window dressing for that one confrontation, that clash between two people who have a dispute that they're going to settle in a fight. Now, as we all know, crowd reaction is everything in wrestling. If the crowd is dead, it's hard to get into a match. And if the crowd is booing everything that happens in a match, then, well, that might be entertaining to watch, but it certainly doesn't facilitate the enjoyment of the actual competition that's going on in the ring. So, the easiest way of making fans get into a match to give the right reaction is for them to have one person that they want to root for and another person that they want to root against. Now, sometimes you do have face versus face matches, but for them to be truly successful, it really takes two superstars, two hugely popular stars that are so popular that you're going to have half the crowd rooting for one, half the crowd rooting for the other, you know, like the Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior. Another way it can work is if both the babyface wrestlers are excellent wrestlers, excellent performers, and so it becomes more of just a wrestling clinic, mostly for the fans, for their entertainment, I suppose, and for competition's sake. Let's say it's CM Punk and Daniel Bryan, and they're both faces, and the crowd is loving it because it's fantastic wrestling, and they're getting to see who's gonna be the victor on this night. And this can work as the exception that proves the rule. But even then, I say it only goes so far, because when you're watching a wrestling match like that and you're lapping it up, but you're sort of happy whatever happens. You know, you're just happy to see these guys do what they do, and it's a feel-good match, and I can enjoy that. But if that's all we had in wrestling, we'd be missing out on the most dramatic matches, the most dramatic storytelling, because that requires a protagonist and an antagonist. And bear in mind, you can have a babyface versus babyface match where you basically have a de facto heel and a de facto face emerge. If you look at the WrestleMania 28 Triple H versus The Undertaker with Shawn Michaels as the guest referee in a Hell in a Cell, Triple H became the de facto heel, Undertaker the face. So you could still have that, the higher drama of a face versus heel, even though they were both really face wrestlers at the time. And that is not what I mean when I say shades of grey. When I say shades of grey, I mean wrestlers that aren't consistently presented as somebody to root for or to root against. And if you've been watching the WWE since SummerSlam of 2013, then you'll know what I'm talking about when I say Triple H and Stephanie McMahon, the Authority. Now, like a lot of you listening, I'm sure, I had fond memories of Vince McMahon's Evil Corporation. And so I thought, this is what we're going to be getting with Daniel Bryan. It's going to be him versus the Evil Machine. But instead what we got was a machine that was sometimes evil, but then sometimes benevolent. Sometimes they'd be screwing over Daniel Bryan, and sometimes they'd be screwing over their handpicked champion Randy Orton. Sometimes they'd be doing absolutely despicable things. They'd be humiliating the Big Show, bullying the man, Stephanie McMahon making the guy cry on television. Threatening him, we're gonna fire you, you're gonna lose your house, all of this stuff. Terrible things. But then maybe a few segments later, they'd be trying to embarrass Vicky Guerrero, the heel, deafening boos for Vicky Guerrero, and there they are, trying to embarrass her. And then obviously the crowd, they cheer for them in that segment, or they don't really know whether they should cheer for them. And that is the heart of the problem. Because what's the sound of the response to a character that people are rooting for? They're cheering, they're going wild, they're making a lot of noise. What's the response for a character that is despised? They're booing them, they're heckling them, they're making a lot of noise. What's the response for a character that is now trying to get one over on another character you dislike, even though you don't like them either? It's people talking amongst themselves. Maybe half of the crowd is booing a bit, half the crowd is cheering a bit. It's a mess. It doesn't come across well on TV, and it just doesn't tell a story. Nobody knows what they're supposed to be thinking, and so they don't feel anything. And for a while, I would rationalize it as, well, in real life, bad people aren't bad all the time. They're not consistently bad. Or maybe they don't want to present themselves as completely evil. They want people to think that they're nice guys, so they will be disingenuously doing nice things. But while that might work for a book or for a film, it doesn't work in wrestling. And it doesn't work in wrestling because, unlike in books or films, in wrestling your audience is right there, and after everything that you say or do, they have to react. So let's look at an example. Let's say that Triple H is doing one of these disingenuous nice things. So let's say he's standing there in the ring and he says, last week or last night at the pay-per-view, the Rhodes Brothers were screwed out of their titles, so tonight we're going to give them a title shot tonight on Raw. Obviously the crowd's got to cheer that because they like the Rhodes Brothers and it seems like he's doing the right thing. Now, even if those fans know that he's not really being nice, maybe he's setting them up for some other kind of injustice, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to boo because we know that you're not genuine? So they're going to boo when he says, we're going to give you what you want. It just doesn't work. There's no real reaction for any of these things. And then you got the situations when they're not even announcing decisions. They're just doing their babyface routines. I mean, even early into this Authority storyline, Triple H would come out and he'd still do his, are you ready? I said, oh, yeah. And I mean, the crowd's gonna do it. Everybody loves a catchphrase. Everybody loves when they get to chant along with things. And I was thinking, why the hell is he doing this? When he's building up all of this seething resentment, why is he then having the crowd join in? And the most egregious example of this is, of course, the New Age Outlaws. So they come back and they're baby faces, they're legacy stars, they're doing their nostalgia run, and that's fine. I'm into that. I'm enjoying that. But then they turn heel on CM Punk. Or do they turn heel? I mean, they double cross the guy and they align themselves with the Authority, who, even though they sometimes act like baby faces, it's clear that the crowd doesn't like them. So, okay, they've turned heel, but then the next time you see them, they're still doing their... Road Dogg's still coming to the ring with a microphone, doing his classic routine with the crowd participation. And everybody loves that. Of course they're going to join in. But, I mean, I've said already about how I think it just destroys the narrative. But what actually pissed me off about this is they're currently feuding with the Usos. Now, the Usos over the past years have built up this crowd support. You know, the crowd are firmly behind them. But then last week on Raw, they had the New Age Outlaws. They're standing in the ring, and before they do their introduction on the microphone, they make some snide comment to the Usos. You know, clear off out the ring. You know, let the veterans do what they do, or something like that. And the Usos, they oblige at first. Seemingly, they exit the ring, and then as the Road Dogg's getting into his routine and the crowd is joining in, the Usos jump them. And the Usos jump them, stop the crowd from being able to do what they were enjoying doing, and so naturally, the crowd turns on them and boos them. So you spent all of these years getting the crowd to be in favour of the Usos, and then, because of your foolish booking, you have the crowd turn on them and support the New Age Outlaws. And that's a shame, you know, because I think the New Age Outlaws could be great today if they just played heels all the time, just consistently got the crowd to dislike them and stayed that way. Didn't do anything when they're like mugging for cheers or anything like that. Just stayed as heels. Because Road Dogg is still witty, he's still really sharp. And Billy Gunn, I think he's easy to dislike. He's got that sort of arrogance about him. I think they could be great. I think they could have had a fantastic feud with the Rhodes brothers. But instead, we got Shades of Grey. I mean, look back at some of the greatest villains in wrestling. Of my years of watching wrestling, which is about 24 years, I've got to say Mr. McMahon, the evil boss, is probably my favourite wrestling villain. But look how he portrayed himself. He was evil. He was universally despised. He didn't sometimes come out and stack the deck against Austin, but then other times come out and stack the deck against his own corporation. Sometimes come out cheerleading for the baby faces, giving the people what they want, doing some sort of catchphrase routine so that the crowd could all join in. If he'd have done that, it wouldn't have worked as well as it did. He wouldn't have been universally despised. He'd have had some people would like to cheer, or some people thought, I don't know, you know, he's not so bad. Sometimes he does the right thing. No. He was evil. He was always evil. He was the villain and Austin was our hero. You know, people can say Austin was a tool in a character. Well, maybe he was at first before they really embraced him as a top star. But once he became a top star, he was a face. And because a babyface doesn't have to be a certain way. They don't have to be, you know, smiling, sucking up to the fans. They don't have to be Mr. Nice Guy. They just have to be the guy that you root for. When Austin was in a match, when Austin was in a feud, it was clear he's the guy you're supposed to be behind, not the other guy. That's what made him the face and the other guy the heel. Now, to wrap this all up, I can't remember if it was Jim Cornette or Jim Ross who came up with this hypothetical. I've heard it a few times. But he said, imagine you come across two guys having a fight. And one guy, he's a burly big bastard. He's built, he looks tough, he looks like he's been in a lot of fights. But the other guy, he's a weedy little fucker. And he's scrawny, and he looks like he doesn't stand a chance. And he's getting battered. He's getting destroyed. But then against all odds, the little guy seems to be mounting a comeback. It looks like he just might be able to pull off a minor miracle and turn this thing around. Well, naturally, you're rooting for the underdog. It's just sort of part of our psyche. We know who we're rooting for. But what if you knew all along that the big guy was fighting the little guy because the little guy had been cheating with his wife? But then you also knew that the big guy was abusive to his wife. And, you know, then you don't know who to root for. So then you watch, or maybe you don't watch because you just lose interest. And that's sort of what happens here. It all just works so much better when you know who to support and who not to support. And it can be split. It can be like John Cena versus The Rock, where to some people, Rock's the babyface, Cena's the heel, you know, the other people, but at least they all consistently know who they're rooting for. And they know why they're rooting for them. And that's why Shades of Grey, it may be great in films, maybe great in books. Some of my favourite characters are these sort of morally ambiguous characters. You know, when you read it and you're like, this is really fascinating insight into the human psyche. But that's not a very loud, vociferous response at a wrestling event, and that is why it doesn't work. Alright, that was one long-ass segment. But like I say, this is the show for the thinking man, for the thinking fan. But if that was a bit too in-depth for your liking, maybe I was a bit too repetitive, let me know, because this is still a work in progress, and I really, really want to hear your feedback. But if you're with me, then stay tuned and listen to the next segment, because I'm going to go in depth about the Bautista problem. and why Batista just won't get over with his current character as a babyface in this day and or age. Thanks for listening.